right. Well, welcome to the School Turnaround Podcast. My name is Dr. Chance Lewis. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I am excited for our next guest, Mr. Sam Kelly. He is an education reporter, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about himself in a second. But I'm so excited to have him because he is actually doing daily coverage on the what I call the central hub of school turnaround in the country, in Houston, Texas as well. So, Mr. Kelly, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, I know you're busy, so I thank you for carving out time to be with us today. I was so excited when you accepted the invitation to join the podcast because the whole purpose of this podcast is to really highlight school turnaround initiatives that are going on across the country and provide solutions for a variety of stakeholders that are looking to facilitate this change in their local areas as well. So if you could you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are now to report on such a high-profile school turnaround initiative there in Houston.
Yeah. I've been covering Houston ISD for about a year now. I started covering the public school district about a month before the takeover took effect. And before that, I spent about 2 years at the Chronicle covering marginalized communities, which meant, I was covering a little bit of everything from criminal justice to immigration to arts and culture. So I think that background has helped kind of understand, the communities who are being served by the public school district and, what's going on in the city more broadly.
Right. So was this an assignment that you were looking to take on, or just kind of fell in your lap to start covering school turnaround?
It was something. No, I did not necessarily apply for this role, but the paper needed someone to kind of be following this closely as the takeover was happening. It's been one of the biggest stories of the city, over the last year for a lot of different reasons. And so it's also not just me who reports on public schools at the Chronicle. I have a great colleague, Megan Menchaca, who also covers Houston ISD. And we had a third colleague, Anna Bowman, who recently left for another opportunity, but she was covering it as well. So it's definitely been a team effort.
Great. Well, let's dive right in. So in your current assignment, you cover and document probably one of the most watched school turnaround initiatives in the country. As well. So give us a brief overview of just some of the recent history of what's going on in Houston and why it's so important for stakeholders around the country to pay attention to what's going on there.
Yeah, so Houston ISD is the largest school district in Texas. It's one of the biggest school districts in the country. And it faces a lot of the same challenges that any major urban school district faces, especially around achievement gaps between communities of color and low-income children and wealthier, often whiter peers in the district. And the takeover that happened last June has been years in the making. The Texas Education Agency, I want to say as far back as 2017, started getting the ball rolling after the state legislature passed a bill that allowed the Texas Education Agency to take over an entire public school district if a single school failed 5 years in a row. And that bill was written by a Houston Democrat, interestingly enough. It had the support of the region's prominent Democrats at the time. It was part of a much larger education bill. And yeah, Houston's Wheatley High School, historically black high school in the city's Fifth Ward, triggered that bill in 2017, and the state got the ball rolling on taking over the public school district. It was paused by various lawsuits over the years, and also it's worth mentioning that Wheatley High School did improve its academic rating, its state rating. By the time the takeover happened, Wheatley was no longer in that failing category. But the state went ahead with it and replaced the district's elected school board and superintendent with an appointed school board and appointed superintendent. And it's every step of this process has been met with really intense opposition from the city's Democratic circles, and on the ground there's been a lot of community opposition, from parents, from teachers. There are also some families who are welcoming the changes, but by and large, it's been a pretty big battle for political reasons, I think, as much as educational ones.
Right. And thank you for giving us that recent history and the background of what led up to this. And I've been watching this unfold for a number of years, and read your reporting around this. So as this change came to be recently, there was a lot of pushback, as you mentioned. So what in your opinion, what is the heart of the why of the big pushback, outside of change, the normal people don't want to change? I know there's some political aspects. So, for our listening audience, help us understand the why.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. On a political level, I think rightly or wrongly, the new superintendent, Mike Miles, is associated with the state's Republican leadership because they are the people ultimately who put him in charge. He was not chosen by an elected school board, and he was chosen by the state's education commissioner, who himself answers to Governor Greg Abbott. And so Greg Abbott is not an especially popular figure here in Houston, in a mostly blue city. And this is also just one of many battles between the state government and the local government here in Houston. So a lot of people view all of this through that context. The superintendent himself does not really ever bring politics into the picture, but I think for a lot of people, it's impossible to really separate his leadership from the political context in which it occurred. So that's the political side of things. And then on an educational side, the superintendent is focusing his most sweeping reforms on Black and brown schools. And he's arguing that it's because those schools are the ones that need the most attention because their students have been falling behind wealthier, whiter peers around the city. And so that's his argument, but a lot of community members who disagree with what his reforms entail feel like he is targeting Black and brown students and subjecting them to a kind of rigid and joyless, education that other students in the district don't have to endure. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Both sides of that argument acknowledge that he is focusing his reforms on communities of color. He views it as a positive thing, and his opponents view that as a negative thing. And I would say those are the two main drivers.
Yeah, and thank you for contextualizing that for us because all of that plays a part of that. I always say education, always takes on in some form or fashion the current political landscape as well as it relates to policies and procedures. So since we focused on solutions on the podcast, let's talk through a little bit. I know it's things are still in the early stages, right? But what are you seeing from a standpoint of early signs of how they are measuring success
Yeah.
around the implementation?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you mentioned, it's really early. So, the students just took their first round of state standardized tests a couple weeks ago. So we won't get the results back, for several months on that. But I think that will be a really important indicator of success, whether or not you believe in the effectiveness of standardized testing. It is a measurement that the state feels is important, and it's one that the district administration is using to evaluate itself. So that will be really interesting to get those results back. As far as other academic outcomes, students took their middle of the year NWEA exams back in the winter, and students in the reform schools, the schools known as the new education system, did show marginal improvement since the beginning of the year, since their benchmark exams in the beginning of the year. So that's an early sign of progress. I would say the other big kind of tangible indicator at the moment, however, is staff turnover. I think with any change in administration, some type of turnover is to be expected. But teachers so far have been resigning at twice the rate of any of the past 5 years. Teachers have been leaving the district in pretty high numbers. School principals have been either removed or have resigned themselves at pretty high numbers so far this year. There's been significant turnover in that regard as well, and that's another thing that I think is giving families, families at the reform schools, but also at the non-reform schools as well. That's been a great cause for concern over these last several months. Is parents are reporting that their children have had 3 or 4 teachers this year alone, and those would be the two tangible indicators, I think, at the moment of how things are going.
Yeah, and those are key indicators. And just to clarify for our listening audience, you talked about the reform schools and the non-reform schools. About how many reform schools are under HISD?
Yeah, so on the first day of Mike Miles' arrival in Houston, he announced that 28 schools in 3 high school feeder patterns would join his new education system, as he called it. These schools were all in Northeast Houston, predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods of the city. He modeled his reforms, off of initiatives that he implemented in Dallas and also at his charter network, Third Future Schools. And so it started with 28 schools. Over the summer, they expanded the program to 57 more schools, which they refer to as being NES aligned, which operate the same, operate the same way as the original 28 NES schools, but the teachers and staff there are not paid the substantially higher salaries that the original NES schools received. And he said that he added those 57 extra schools due to principals' requests, that they wanted to be a part of this program. They wanted the supports and the resources that came with being in this program. So that's what he has argued. And then next year it will be expanding to about 40 more schools. So yeah, by next year, this new education system will have expanded to nearly half of the school district.
Wow. Okay. So based off of that, given the enormity of how we see it growing, what are you seeing is how the school district is utilizing partnerships, there in Texas with some of the leading universities in Texas, some of the state and local legislatures, that are there, and community stakeholders. Are there any kind of partnerships that you've been able to kind of look at that they're doing to move this initiative forward?
Well, I will be honest with you, it's not something I've looked at, super closely. So I can't give you the most comprehensive answer, but I do know that the school is continuing to partner with local universities for teacher apprentice programs and teacher development. That's still going on. I mean, that was a point of controversy a couple months ago. A professor at the University of Houston's College of Education stopped holding his courses in protest because he didn't want his students being placed in Houston ISD schools. He felt that that their placement there made it impossible for them to complete their coursework and develop as teachers, and so he suspended his course in protest. So it has been something that has affected college partnerships as well.
Wow. So it's definitely a lot going on there as well. So based off of your, I guess, roughly a year of reporting around this initiative since the superintendent came in, let's talk through a couple of stakeholders and think about some of the recommendations that, from what you've seen on the ground, that you would consider as well. So let's talk about the school district, particularly the school board. What do you see that are some things that they need to consider going forward based on what you're learning?
Well, it's not really my place, I think, to be making suggestions or anything like that. But the school board is interesting. I think at the beginning of the year, the school board accepted pretty much everything that the superintendent presented to them at face value. The school board is made up of various stakeholders in the community. There's business people, there's lawyers, there's one teacher, and I think a lot of them didn't have much of a background in education or school governance, and it's obviously a really there's going to be a learning curve, and so this school board voted unanimously in favor of every single thing that that the superintendent put in front of them for several months now, and only recently did only recently has the school board have like members here and there started to vote against a certain proposal or publicly kind of demand more answers or information, and even I can't say whether or not this was the school board's decision, but the superintendent made a decision to um, reverse reverse a controversial uh, initiative he had implemented regarding principal screenings that were being used to evaluate whether or not principals would return next year. After we reported that
Mm-hmm.
almost half of the district's principals had not met the you know the first benchmark to guarantee their jobs, there was this huge public outcry. I
Sure.
think thousands of people emailed the board members, and they were in closed session until 2 a.m. at the next board meeting. And after they came
Wow.
out, the superintendent announced that he was reversing that decision, which has been really rare this year, that he you know changes course in the face of public backlash.
Right.
And I have to imagine that there were some conversations between the board and the superintendent behind closed doors on that. And so I think we're starting to see the board kind of find its voice a little bit. What I would be comfortable encouraging the school board to do is, to continue finding their voice, to continue demanding more answers, to push back against things that they might not agree with, and to really consider, the community's input, because up until recently they have voted unanimously in favor of every single thing that's been put in front of them. And I think you know, anyone who has experience with school boards, I think, knows that that's pretty unusual. And I think it discredits the legitimacy of what the appointed administration is trying to do, when it looks like there is, at least publicly, when it looks like there is no type of real debate or consideration of differing perspectives.
Right.
So
Right.
they are starting to kind of find their voice a little bit, and I would encourage them to continue to do that.
Great, great. I appreciate that. And then this one final kind of broader question: when you look at what's going on in the school district, like many other large metropolitan cities, variety of
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders kind of look in at the educational system to kind of make decisions about things in the city. So let's take, for example, like the business community in Houston, or the tourism community. As you kind of look at your reporting, are you seeing any ripple effects in the larger view of the city, and the impact of this initiative on other aspects of city business?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit too early to tell
Okay.
again,
Okay.
exactly how widespread that will be. I know that Houston's business community has really thrown their full support behind Mike Miles and the
Okay.
appointed administration. Um, to what end? Uh, I think it's too early to say, but he does have the support of the business community for sure. Um, and then there are other aspects that I think are kind of hard to attribute specifically to the takeover. School enrollment, or enrollment at HISD, has been dropping for years,
Mm-hmm.
and will likely continue to drop. You know, over the next couple of years. Now, whether that drop will be more drastic because of the takeover or not, time will tell.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we do see more students, enrolling in charter schools, or moving out to the suburbs to enroll
Sure.
in suburban school districts. And again, I don't think that's especially unique to Houston ISD, but I think it will be an interesting question to see if the takeover exacerbates that.
Right.
Um, yeah, but that would be the main thing, I think.
Yes. So that's pretty interesting, the larger ripple, effects that you can kind of see. And, it's hard to, like you said, directly attribute one thing to another thing as well.
Hmm.
So in closing, as you report this, and you do great reporting, and I commend you, on that. When you kind of look out into the horizon, what are some things that you see that people may need to be paying attention to that could be on the horizon in the near future as we watch your reporting?
Yeah, I think seeing how Houston ISD handles its budget compared to how other major urban districts handle their budget next year is going to be really interesting.
Hmm.
There has not been much transparency this year
Okay.
under this new administration around what that budget is going to look like, at least compared to years past, where they have public budget workshops and you know debate it in the boardroom.
Okay.
That's not really happened this year, so we don't have a ton of information yet on that. But every school district is going to be dealing with budget cuts. I think it's fair to say, and it'll be interesting to compare how districts that with elected boards that answer to the community, how those districts deal with cuts compared to how HISD deals with their budget. That's one thing I'm personally looking forward to seeing. I think the issue of staff turnover will continue to be important. How widespread turnover is and who is leaving specifically,
Hmm.
as well as who they're putting in their place. I think uh, will be pretty hugely important next year. Enrollment, as I mentioned, whether enrollment drops, more steeply than predicted because of how this year has gone, or if it doesn't, if maybe the opposition is a little bit overblown and by and large people are staying with the school district, and then academic outcomes. I'll be interested to see those standardized test scores when they get back, um,
Right.
and see if the progress that was promised, um, you know, is happening.
Sure. Sure. And that's good. And
Mhm.
and you laid out some good things for us to continue to watch. And I just want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join today. Like I said, I'm a fan of your work and your reporting as well. That's why I wanted to reach out. So I'm glad it worked out where you could be on the podcast and kind of just give
Mhm.
us some perspective of what's going on, and some things that may be on the horizon as well. Because one thing I do know in my work across the country, a lot of people are looking in at Houston to see how this all plays out, as a potential
Yeah.
either model of replication or a model of, what not to do, as well. So, so
Right.
people are just kind of on standby, to
Yeah.
see as well. So thank you again for
Yeah.
your work. Thank you again for joining the School Turnaround Podcast. I really appreciate your time as well. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it as well.
Okay. Well, you have a great day. Talk to you soon. Okay.
You too. Bye bye.